2013, and he's going to tell you everything you ever wanted to know about him, his life, the Wall Street Journal, what he did to get there, how much Feehan helped him.
Heavy on the last part, for sure. Hey, as it's been introduced, I'm Kevin McAllister. Graduated from Feehan in 2013. Out of curiosity, did anybody have brothers or sisters that graduated in 2013? Wow. Who was it?
Andrew Shoddy.
Oh, all right. Congrats to your older brother, too. So I just got married. Anyway, yeah, I work at the Wall Street Journal right now, but I figured I would take you through, after Feehan, life through school, and kind of how I got some of the opportunities that have been afforded to me. At the Journal, I focus mainly on two things. Primarily, I look at rankings. So the one that's probably most relevant to you guys is I do our college rankings, work a lot with the data there and figure out how we place one college ahead of another, which hopefully is a tool as you guys and your parents are considering where the next step will be after Feehan. Hopefully that's a decent tool, but also things that are kind of more fun, like airport rankings and management rankings. And the other kind of aspect of the job that I do is I write a personal finance column that is geared towards people that are my age, a little bit younger, a little bit older. I'm 24, by the way. I don't know if I mentioned that. But I think before we even get into anything more, I think I probably know the answer to this question already, but do any of you guys read the Wall Street Journal at all?
Oh, come on.
Sorry, let me rephrase that. Do any of you guys read the Wall Street Journal without being assigned it? That's kind of what I thought. Part of the reason that my job exists is that we do have a bit of a perception problem with people that are my age, a little bit younger, and potentially even a couple of years older, which is that we're all kind of high-minded finance. It's tough to get a read on maybe some of the concepts that we're covering. It's not exactly known as the fun paper, sadly. So we've had a lot of efforts in the last couple of years to try to make content that's more appealing to a different generation, a different stereotypical reader than maybe you would imagine who reads the Wall Street Journal, somebody who probably looks a lot like my parents and maybe a lot like your parents as well. So anyway, back up about 5 or 6 years, and I was graduating from Feehan. I had thought for a long time that I wanted to do journalism, and I didn't really know what capacity I really wanted to do it in. I'm a big baseball fan. Growing up, I always wanted to be the voice of a team on the radio. I am not the voice of a team on the radio, but that's okay. But I went through to USC, where I graduated in 2017. I was not on the rowing team. I wasn't recruited for the rowing team. But, certainly knew some people who were. There, kind of got the opportunity to do a few more journalism-related activities. Worked in the student newsroom and had the opportunity to intern for CNN and NBC, and at that point decided, I think, right around junior or senior year that I wanted to move to New York and started looking for jobs, which is something that I'm sure is in all of your futures. That is not a fun process, but one that is worthwhile. So applied a bunch of places, got rejected a bunch of places. Ultimately, found a spot at the Journal doing video specifically, which was, again, not really what I had envisioned, but it was the opportunity that was open for me. And did that for about a year before I kind of made the transition over to the rankings beat and started figuring out, how we could make data more usable and make it more accessible, and more specifically, the fun part, figure out what's number one, and as it is with airports, figure out which one's the worst. So that's kind of a brief kind of rundown of how I went from Feehan to where I am now. But I figured it would probably be most. I know that there's a financial literacy class in here, so I figured it would be most beneficial to just kind of talk to you guys about how I approach that second part of my job that I was saying, which is the column and the kind of the sourcing and the figuring out what to write about. Because if it's not already a big part of how you guys are making decisions, as you guys get into college, as you guys get past college, things start to add up, and it's can be a bit of a culture shock, especially when rent payments are due, and figuring out, basically how you spend your money is going to be really indicative of how, you're feeling in the rest of your life as you kind of progress through it. So I think maybe some of you have read one of the pieces that I first wrote for the column, which was a piece about Venmo. Do you guys use Venmo at all? Yeah? Super helpful, right? It didn't come out until I think I was a freshman in college, maybe a sophomore in college, so it wasn't something that I necessarily grew up with. But when it came out, it was a total game changer. And it was one of those things where, I stopped using as much cash. It became less of a hassle to try to pay my friends back. But, even now, I pay my utilities through Venmo to one of my roommates has a account with our, electric bill and stuff like that. So we're eventually, passing decent sums of money back and forth to one another. And it kind of came to light as I was talking to a fair number of people that there are different etiquette norms on the way that people actually handle that. And I'm sure you guys have all been in a situation where you're owed, however much money, and you see them, you don't know whether you can say, hey, you owe me $20, or hey, you owe me, or hey, I owe you $20, or something like that. But figuring out, how those etiquette norms that you might normally have if you were paying somebody back with cash, how those kind of translated into the digital age. So that was kind of the basis of the first story that I wrote for the column, which was, the idea basically was to make something that was money related, a little bit more accessible, something that I actively thought about, because it was something that affected me personally. I think at the time I was, the idea may have even been generated from the fact that somebody owed me like $30. But it was fun to write. And the process of writing any of these columns is usually, it starts with listening. So if anybody is considering going into journalism in any capacity, that's usually the first thing that I try to tell them, is that the number one thing that you have to do is listen, because people are always willing to say kind of what's on their mind as long as you know what to listen for. So, for example, this was, that story came out of a set of conversations that I'd had with people when they weren't sure when they were going to get their money back. They weren't sure if it was kosher for them to, if they were out getting dinner, request somebody at the table, or if they should wait a day, if they should wait a week, if they should use that remind function, any of the kind of intricacies that come with the app that really has a straightforward premise to it, which is just send me money, I'll send you money back. But that was one example that was kind of personal to me. But the another one came when I was talking to a friend of mine who had recently put a bunch of their bills onto kind of an auto pay system. So if you guys have, you guys probably have Netflix subscriptions or YouTube subscriptions or Spotify or something like that. I do. And I have all those bills just automatically deduct from my account, which is fine when you know when things are going to hit your account, and it's fine when it's a certain amount of money that you don't think you're going to maybe miss just for a month's worth of Netflix. But there's when it comes to things like rent and when it comes to things like utilities or any of the other kind of bigger payments that are getting deducted from your account, my friend was telling me that he just, offhand he mentioned to me that it was really hard for him to keep track of how much money he was going to have in his account at any given time, which is a real concern, by the way, as you are entering the workforce. So figuring out, listening to him say that he wasn't, necessarily comfortable with how much he was getting charged each day, if there were any extra fees that were coming out of this or that, inspired me to write a different account just about how we even pay for things is differently. I don't know if you guys have like Apple Pay or anything like that, but to me it seemed like there was a fundamental divide even between the way that my parents paid for things and the way that I was paying for things. They got a bill in the mail for something, they wrote a check, they cut the check, they put it back in the mail. Or they, took out cash, they heard the total at a cash register, they took out the cash, they paid for it, or even swiped the card. But me, growing up kind of where we are now and coming into, coming into my own with, paying with cards and Apple Pay and contactless and all that, good stuff that's out there now. It seemed like there were fewer, pain points when it came to paying something. It was very easy for me and to go to a cash register to swipe a card, and then since that, that money was being automatically deducted from my account, it wasn't something I necessarily even thought twice about. So it came down to kind of listening and hearing what people had to say and how they were spending money and how they were figuring out the ins and outs of what worked and what didn't for their particular situation. Because at the end of the day, a lot of what we do spend money on is really social. It's things that involve other people, whether it's something that's actually social and fun, or whether it's something that just happens to involve somebody else in a different capacity. And so there are a lot of decisions that people will make that impact really not just themselves but other people. And that's kind of what I've been most interested in as I've been writing the personal finance column in particular, is how what I choose to spend money on or how I choose to save, how that can impact me down the line, how that can impact the people around me, or even how that can cause problems for me in one capacity or another. So that kind of brought me to a couple of other places that I wanted to explore. There were the column I'm working on right now, actually, one that is coming out scarily like a week from Monday, considering I still need to write it. But the one I'm working on right now is based on when you actually decide to break the bank and spend your money on something. So I'm sure you guys can all relate on when you've actually decided to spend some money, you want to splurge, you want to buy something for yourself, whether it's something that you can go do, like tickets to a concert or a comedy show or something like that, or whether it's a thing like a new jacket, a new pair of shoes, new bag, or something else like that. So there's a ton of research out there and a ton of debate, I think, when people are thinking about spending money on experiences versus spending money on things. And as much as a lot of what I try to talk about in the column is how to spend smarter, or how to save better, or how to make sure that you're putting enough in a retirement account, or any of the other things that people have told me since growing up is important. The inevitability is that my wallet's going to burn a hole in my pocket at some point if I have a little bit of money to spend, and I'm going to want to do something fun and really kind of enjoy life as it comes. So the focus of that column is to some extent based on things versus experiences. What's going to bring you the most joy? What's going to make you avoid that buyer's remorse and make sure that you feel validated when you actually spend money? Because I'm sure you guys have been under the in the situation where you shell out for something new, and then a couple days later you decide you don't like it, and maybe you can return it still, but you might be out of luck, and it's really tough to return it if it's a concert and the concert's terrible, or it's it's a comedy show and you don't laugh once. So it's I was trying to think a lot about, again, that same concept of how what you're spending money on is going to impact things that aren't just the balance in your bank account, or what you're buying, but really how it makes you feel, and the kind of behavioral economics that's behind any of those purchases that you might make in a day or a week or a month. And I talked to a bunch of psychologists. I talked to a bunch of friends of mine and friends of friends and things like that, and it seemed that people were very much split into kind of two camps when it came to things versus experiences. I'd be curious if you guys even kind of think about it in that capacity. But if you had a choice between spending money on a thing versus spending money on an experience, what would you raise your hand if you would buy a thing if you had money to do so? Okay, decent number. How about an experience, like yeah, that's probably more of kind of the demographics of the people that I talk to too. It's experiences are more likely to bring you kind of that lasting happiness. You can make a memory, you can kind of grow your own personal character and your social capital and things like that. Is if an experience can make you more interesting, it can change you, and it can be a really worthwhile, memorable activity. But for those of you who put things up, again, a lot of the camp that I talked to was saying, which as you guys probably already know, things are great to have. They don't lose their value. If you buy a nice jacket, it's still going to be a nice jacket probably in 6 months or a year, and it doesn't depreciate in value or anything like that. But I mean, back to the kind of point at hand. That was one of those things again where the idea wasn't born necessarily from listening to my friends or what they had to say, but it was born from listening to what the media tends to say about people that are my age, especially people that are younger than me, and even people that are older than me too. Things like, I'm sure you've seen headlines online or something like that that's millennials or Gen Z are killing X industry. Those really make me mad. But it was, I think I saw one that was like, basically millennials and Gen Z are killing the, material economy of saying, I want this or that, and everything's kind of shifting over to how we think about experiences, and how we are spending our money now is on whatever will give us the, the cool Instagram, or the, the experience that we can talk about at the party or lunch table or wherever you are. So again, it kind of, it all, in terms of the journalism side of things, it all kind of comes back to listening. But the, I've been writing now this column for about a year. Before that, I was writing some other personal finance stuff about things that are actually not even really things I'm focusing on yet, like saving for college for my kids, which I don't have, or saving for, saving to buy a house, which I haven't, really thought about too much. But I think to some extent, the reason that I've gotten to write about a lot of this stuff, and specifically the ones that I can put kind of my own spin on and put my thoughts into more than just a purely reported story, are because I don't have necessarily a strong business background. Like I said, I graduated from college with a degree in political science and digital journalism, and have just kind of been figuring it out as I go. And there's a lot of, I before I took the job at the Journal, read as much of the Journal as I possibly could, but to some extent, there's a lot of learning while you do it, and trying to figure out how you're going to balance your budget and how you're going to pay yourself first, and figure out ways that you can actively save while still, making sure that you can have fun, are things that are really like a give and take process. And that's kind of the basis of why I get to write about what I get to write about, which is that it's an iterative kind of situation where I've made plenty of mistakes down the line, and spent money on things that I shouldn't have, or budgeted things wrong, or overspent on a dinner here, underspent on groceries here, or eaten out at on a Tuesday when I probably should have thrown some pasta in a pot and cooked it. But the financial literacy element of it, and the part that's really interesting for me, is that it's an opportunity that you guys have kind of in the class already, which is to understand kind of those real world aspects of how to make sure that you can balance a budget, or figure out basically everything that you need to know about spending and saving money even before you have to. Yeah.
I think a bunch of kids have some questions if you're willing to open it up.
Would love to. Yeah. Anybody have questions?
Okay. Somebody's got to be brave. There we go.
So how would you say, like, you apply your knowledge in personal finance in your own life, like daily?
Yeah.
Daily? That's my first question.
Sure. Like apply it in my actual personal life. Well, I kind of have the benefit of again getting to use my own voice in some capacity. So one of the topics that I wrote about was trying to figure out how to go on a vacation with a significant other. And so, it was one of those things where I didn't have much knowledge beforehand on how to do that. I talked to a bunch of people, and then I was able to, apply it back and say, some people tend to split the cost of going to, this place or that place this way. Some people tend to split it another way. But it was something that I was considering, myself and trying to figure out how to actually do it in my own life. And so I have the benefit there of getting to think about something and then immediately, going out and having a job to actually talk to people about it, and then kind of being forced to apply it to my own life. But even before that, I think it's one of those difficult things because it's easy to repeat the same kind of mantras, right? And say, like, you should save as much as you can. You should be putting X% of your income towards a retirement account or, saving for something big. But in practice, especially when there's, temptations here and there to go out with friends and spend money in different ways, it's harder to kind of, I think, bridge that gap. But it really just comes down to practice. It's one of those skills that I think you can be, you can start bad at and become good at pretty quickly. And similarly, it's pretty easy to have that skill atrophy if you take a couple months off and say, I don't need to think about this. It's something that you just think about, you get good at, and then you can kind of automate and put on in the background.
One of my guys had a Venmo question.
Where would you go if you didn't go to USC?
That's a good question. When I was choosing schools, I was between USC, Syracuse, and George Washington down in DC. If I could go anywhere in terms of like if a place would accept me, I really liked Georgetown. I really liked Northwestern out in Chicago, and I knew I wanted to study journalism in some capacity at least. And even though what I left Feehan thinking I was going to be doing post-grad and what I'm actually doing now is pretty drastically different, it's still kind of under that same umbrella. So I looked into the journalism schools that were around the country, ultimately decided on USC. But yeah, Syracuse was great. I'm a big sports fan too, so I wanted to go to a place that had D1 sports and, that I could be at games every Saturday or, through basketball season.
So, how do you think people should handle Venmo since you wrote about it?
Sure. Probably should have an answer to that, right? So my takeaway was it only really gets awkward when people are using Venmo when they do use, I thought, at least for the group of people that I was talking to, there were two things. Number one was things got made a little bit more awkward when people used the charge function instead of people kind of just proactively paying someone else back. I understand that sometimes it's necessary to charge somebody, especially if they don't pay you back immediately, but I thought that the onus, when it could be shifted to the person who was like getting the gift of not having to pay in the moment, and the one person who may be covering somebody else, when that can be shifted back towards them and say, you should be paying me, I shouldn't be charging you. That's usually what would alleviate a lot of the awkwardness. And then the other thing was that Venmo has that built-in remind feature, where if you have an outstanding, payment, you can, kind of like resend the notification to somebody's phone. And again, that was one of those things where, if it's, it depends on the person, of course, but the majority of people I talked to said it was kind of just weird to get a notification through an app when that person already had their number and easily could have just texted them and said, hey, by the way, you owe me $15, Venmo me as soon as you can. So I don't know if there's necessarily a right way to do it, but there's, it seems that there's kind of a wrong way, at least in terms of assessing the pain points through a lot of the stories that people were telling me about when Venmo actually made them angry.
What's it like working at such a reputable company? Did you expect yourself to be there, end up there?
It's very old. Like everyone that I work with is a lot older than me. Of course not, no. But it was a culture shock. I came from a place where I was, between 19 and 21 through school, or 18 and 21. And moving to a place where I didn't really know anybody, and moving to a company where a lot of the people were, in their 30s and their 40s and their 50s and beyond. It was tough getting used to, especially. I mean, the thing that I noticed most is, again, being at the, really the beginning of my career is just how people at different ages are balancing their priorities. So for me, it's, if I want to go do something on, a random night after work, or I want to try to see a coworker, after hours or something like that, it's not too big of a deal. But a lot of the people I work with have, families and kids at home. And so really getting to be plunged into an environment where everybody is kind of at a different stage in life is one of those weird, sobering moments of trying to figure out what's important to you. So culturally, that's kind of how it's like. I mean, the other part of that is that it's incredibly, humbling to get to work at an institution that's been around for 130 some odd years. It's pretty cool to walk around and just see the history, and walk around and think about the other people that have sit in the in the seats that are around the newsroom. So it's an honor. It's humbling to work there, but it's also pretty intimidating to some extent, because you're coming in and you're the new kid on the block, and they've probably seen, especially some of the older, more established people that are around our newsroom have probably seen 25 people that are my age come into a newsroom, try to do something and try and fail maybe. But it's a good experience generally. It's just a little bit nerve-wracking. Yeah.
How do you feel about living in New York City, especially on the financial standpoint?
Well, I was joking actually as I came in here. I share an apartment with two of the guys I went to school with. That's, say, about this wide. It's a tiny apartment. It's tough. It's I love living in New York. It's something that I wanted to do. I went to school out in LA, and then over the summers between my sophomore and junior year and junior and senior year, I was interning in New York. So I kind of got a flavor of wanting to be in the middle of it all. I just, it was still a bit of a shock once I actually moved there and realized that, dollar pizza is a fantastic meal for as many nights a week as you can possibly have it. But yeah, things are expensive. It's, financially, it can be tricky to balance what you want to do and, paying rent and things that you have to do. But ultimately, it's the good outweighs the bad, because even though my apartment is, tiny and my TV's small, it's easy to walk outside of my apartment and find things to do and places to eat that are cheap, and it is definitely doable on a salary starting out of college. You just have to make choices here and there about what you want to do, what you can't do in a given month. But you get to live in New York, which is a lot of fun.
How long does it take you to write a column, and what's the process of having it published?
Yeah. Well, I'm a really slow writer. It takes me a long time because I'm a bit of a perfectionist when I'm starting to write. The columns are about 1,000 words a piece, which is 2 pages or so. and I would say I probably write like 6,000 or 7,000 words on any given column before I find 1,000 that actually are not terrible. I'm sure you guys are familiar with the prospect of writing something and then just reading it back and hating it. That doesn't go away, but it does get easier. On the writing process, that's how it starts usually. I jot down ideas. I take like I said, I take a question that somebody asked me, or I take a thing that I'm going through in my own financial life and try to, figure out how I can approach it, write, talk to a bunch of sources, write as many words as I can, delete as many words of those as I can before writing something that's actually readable. And then the editing process and the publishing process is sometimes easy, sometimes hard, depending on which editor I actually work with. So the editor will take it, they'll read it, they have their own vision for what the story is going to be, and you just kind of hope that the vision that you crafted out is the same as the one that they had. There's usually a back and forth, and it takes. Like I said, this next one that I'm publishing is publishing on the 21st, I think, and so I'm probably going to write it this weekend, or at least send a draft this weekend, which means have probably 3 or 4 days of going back and forth and rewriting things and editing things and trying to pick new phrases and words and ways to actually craft the story before they send it off to the printer. That's kind of the extent of where I drop off. I pick up the paper on whatever day it comes out and see like they have art with it and things like that. But once I write it, pretty much turn it over, and it's the end of my involvement. Anybody else?
One or two more questions.
If you could go like anywhere with your career from here, like with journalism, what would you want to do?
That's a question I've actually been asked a decent number of times recently, and I don't have a good answer for it. But there's a reason I don't have a good answer for it, which is that 5 or 6 years ago, when I was originally planning on what I wanted to do, the job that I currently have didn't exist. The team that I'm on, at the Journal definitely didn't exist. And things are kind of constantly changing in the media landscape and the journalism landscape, in the way that people are consuming news and content and things like that. So, for me to try to figure out what exactly that next step is really tough, because presumably, my job in 5 years is not necessarily going to be one that exists right now. But I think generally, I enjoy what I'm doing right now, and I think if anything, I would want to kind of amp up the number of times I get to actually write things, since they tap me to write every once in a while, but not all the time.
If you could like give us advice, like going into college, like working like part-time jobs in high school and like saving money with that, like what would you say, like what advice would you give us?
Yeah. I would say it's probably going to be I feel like I've said it's going to be a shock like 9 times already, but just, trying to give you guys the lay of the land. Once you get to school, like school tends to be kind of expensive in and of itself, especially if you are trying to get a grip on classes and starting out and don't have time to work a job on campus or something like that. So, as cliche as it is, I would say save as much as you can right now, just because the opportunities that you're going to have at school to do things and to spend money in different ways are going to be really appealing, and it's going to be probably like a lot of fun. You'll be making new friends and figuring out ways to hang out with them and spend money like that. So I would say save as much as you can, because there's a lot that's on the horizon there. Thank you guys so much.